You ever notice how some people don't tell lies they ask them? They twist the truth not by what they say, but by the questions they ask you, because manipulation isn't always loud. It's subtle, it's strategic, and it's designed to make you doubt your own perception of reality. In my years of studying human behavior, I've learned one thing. Liars don't just want to deceive you, they want to control you. And the moment you start explaining yourself to them, they've already won. So today, we're going to expose their playbook. We're going to break down the 5 questions liars ask. Questions meant to guilt you, confuse you, and pull you into their web. By the end of this talk, you won't just recognize manipulation, you'll disarm it, because the most powerful person in any conversation is the one who sees the truth first. Liars rarely start with statements, they start with questions. That's because questions create the illusion of curiosity while actually shifting control. When someone asks you a question, your brain instinctively wants to answer. It's human nature. We're wired to respond, to engage, to fill silence with explanation. But liars understand this psychological reflex and use it to their advantage. Their goal isn't truth, it's influence. When a manipulator asks you something, it's often not because they want clarity, it's because they want leverage. Think about it. The moment you start answering, you're playing their game. They're guiding where the conversation goes, what emotions surface, and how you respond. A liar can turn a simple question like, "Why would I ever lie to you?" into a trap. On the surface, it sounds innocent, maybe even hurt, but underneath, it's a tactic. It forces you to comfort them, defend your perception, or second, guess your instincts. Suddenly, you're not focusing on the lie anymore. You're focusing on proving that you're not unfair, not paranoid, not wrong. And that's exactly where they want you: distracted, emotional, and vulnerable. Control in any conversation belongs to the one who directs the questions. Skilled manipulators understand this better than anyone. They don't waste time making bold claims that can be challenged. Instead, they ask you just enough to make you reveal what you know, how you feel, and where your weaknesses lie. Every answer you give becomes data. Every hesitation becomes an opening. They listen not to understand, but to calculate their next move. You might not even notice it happening. It feels conversational, harmless, maybe even polite. But behind that calm voice and friendly curiosity, there's strategy. When liars start asking questions, they're testing the boundaries of your awareness. They're observing what triggers you, what earns your sympathy, what makes you doubt yourself. The more you explain, the easier you are to manipulate. That's why truth tellers rely on facts, but liars rely on confusion, and confusion often begins with a question that sounds sincere. Here's the dangerous part: liars make you feel like you're in control. They let you talk, they nod, they act receptive, but while you're busy responding, they're mapping the conversation, redirecting your energy, and reframing the narrative. Every manipulative question has one goal: to control the frame of reality. If they can make you react emotionally, they can lead you away from logic. If they can make you explain yourself, they can make you feel guilty, and guilt weakens your ability to hold boundaries. Once you recognize this dynamic, you start to see how powerful silence really is. Because silence breaks their rhythm. When a manipulator throws a question at you that feels awful loaded, "Why are you being so defensive?" or "Don't you trust me?" your instinct might be to justify yourself. But in that moment, your best defense is stillness. Pause, look at the question, not just the words, but the intention underneath. Who benefits from your answer? What emotion are they trying to evoke? If you sense that the question isn't meant to understand you, but to control you, you owe them nothing in return. Control doesn't belong to the one who speaks the most. It belongs to the one who chooses when to speak and when not to. Liars thrive on reaction, and every time you stop reacting, they lose ground. When you refuse to answer manipulative questions, you take back your power. You're not being rude, you're being strategic. You're signaling that you see through the game, that you won't be baited into defending your truth. Because once you understand that questions can be weapons, you stop mistaking manipulation for conversation. Manipulators understand that the fastest way to gain power over someone is not through aggression, but through subtle redirection. When they frame a question that makes you defend yourself, they've already shifted the focus from their behavior to your reaction. Instead of explaining why they did something wrong, you're suddenly explaining why you feel hurt, suspicious, or uncomfortable. It's a masterful reversal, and it's designed to put you on trial. They don't want answers, they want control of the narrative. The moment you start defending yourself, you lose emotional leverage, because defense is reactive and reaction means surrendering control. A liar who manipulates with questions knows exactly how to trigger this reflex. They'll ask things like, "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" Or, "Are you seriously accusing me of something?" Each question forces you into a corner. You feel the need to clarify your intentions, to prove you're not overreacting, to make them understand. But that's the trap. They don't want to understand. They want you explaining, justifying, doubting. Every defensive word you speak gives them more power. These kinds of questions are psychological bait. The manipulator frames them to appear reasonable or emotional, knowing you'll take them at face value. Their tone might be soft, hurt, or offended because emotion is a distraction. If they can make you feel guilty for confronting them, they've already redirected the spotlight. Now you're managing their feelings instead of addressing the truth. They know that empathy can be weaponized. They know you care, and they use that care to dismantle your certainty. In those moments, you're no longer in a rational conversation. You're in a psychological negotiation. The manipulator's goal is to rewrite the power dynamic so that you become the one who's apologizing, explaining, or softening your words. It's a subtle shift, but it's incredibly effective. You might leave the interaction feeling drained, confused, or somehow responsible for what happened. That's the emotional residue of manipulation. It's not that you lost the argument, it's that the conversation was designed for you to lose clarity. A liar's greatest skill isn't deception, it's redirection. They make their questions sound like curiosity when, in truth, they're controlling what gets discussed and what doesn't. If you confront them about dishonesty, they might respond with, "Why would you even think that about me?" That question forces you to defend your perception instead of holding them accountable. It reframes your awareness as the problem, and because you're a decent person who doesn't want to seem unfair, you start walking back your instincts. That's how they win, not through proof, but through persuasion. What makes this tactic so dangerous is how normal it feels. It's hard to recognize manipulation when it's wrapped in polite phrasing. Most people associate lying with aggression or confrontation, but the truth is, the most manipulative individuals are calm, collected, and emotionally intelligent. They understand tone. They understand timing. They ask questions that sound compassionate but carry an undercurrent of accusation. And because you don't want to appear defensive, you take the bait, you answer, you justify, you hand over control without even realizing it. To protect yourself, you have to start noticing when a question doesn't feel genuine. Listen to what's being asked, but also to what's not being asked. Are they interested in your perspective, or are they trying to steer your emotions? Are they owning their actions or making you question yours? When you sense that a question is meant to corner you, stop explaining. Step back, redirect it. You can say, "That's not the point," or "You're deflecting." The key is to avoid defending. Defending means you've accepted their frame, and once you're inside their frame, they control the outcome. Manipulators depend on your instinct to justify yourself. The moment you stop doing that, the dynamic changes. You're no longer reacting, you're observing. You're watching how they twist language, how they create doubt, how they reframe their guilt as your sensitivity. And when you see it clearly, their power dissolves. Because their control doesn't come from the lie, it comes from your willingness to defend yourself against it. Every deceptive question carries an emotional intention behind it, and that's what makes manipulation so powerful. Liars don't just rely on words, they rely on feelings. They know logic can be challenged, but emotions bypass logic entirely. When they ask a question designed to provoke guilt, fear, or doubt, they're not just fishing for information. They're reaching for control over how you feel, and once they influence your emotions, they can shape your decisions, your words, and even your perception of reality. A manipulative person studies emotional responses the way a hunter studies patterns. They learn what makes you hesitate, what makes you soften, what makes you justify. So when they say something like, "Do you really think I'd ever hurt you?" that question isn't innocent, it's a test. It's meant to make you feel guilty for even considering the truth. It reframes your healthy suspicion as betrayal. Now, instead of holding them accountable, you're questioning your own judgment. They've redirected your focus inward, where you're too busy analyzing yourself to see their deception clearly. This is why emotional hooks are the cornerstone of manipulation. Guilt makes you compliant. Doubt makes you silent. Fear makes you obedient. A liar uses all three in rotation depending on what they need from you. If they sense you're close to uncovering the truth, they'll guilt you into backing off. If you start asserting boundaries, they'll sow doubt to make you feel unreasonable. And if you start pulling away, they'll trigger fear, the fear of loss, rejection, or conflict to pull you back in. Every question they ask has a calculated undertone that ties directly to one of these emotions. The brilliance of this tactic is that it feels emotional, not manipulative. You think you're connecting. You think they're being vulnerable, but that's part of the illusion. Manipulators mimic emotional depth because it disarms you. When someone sounds wounded or misunderstood, your empathy activates automatically. And in that moment, you stop questioning their motives. You start comforting, explaining, or reassuring them, all actions that shift power in their direction. They don't need to win the argument, they just need to win your emotional attention. Once a liar has emotional access to you, logic becomes irrelevant. They can twist facts, deny evidence, or contradict themselves, and you'll still hesitate to confront them because you've been emotionally conditioned to protect their feelings over your own truth. That's the invisible leash of manipulation. It doesn't restrain you physically, it binds you emotionally, and it's all done through carefully crafted questions that appear soft but carry psychological weight. Why are you so angry? Don't you trust me? How could you think that of me? Every one of these phrases is loaded with emotional bait designed to trigger guilt or self-doubt. What makes emotional manipulation so dangerous is that it doesn't require lies to work, it just requires the right reaction. You can be absolutely correct about what's happening, but still feel like you're wrong because of how they make you feel. That's the paradox manipulators create. They separate your emotions from your reasoning until you no longer trust your own intuition. The more emotional you become, the easier it is for them to steer the interaction. Breaking this cycle begins with awareness. Start paying attention to how you feel after certain conversations. Do you leave feeling smaller, uncertain, or guilty even when you know you were right? That's a red flag. Emotional hooks leave residue. They make you second, guess your boundaries, and question your value. Once you identify those patterns, you can start detaching emotionally. When someone's question feels off, pause before you respond. Ask yourself, what are they trying to make me feel right now? That one reflection can break the spell. Manipulators can only control emotions they can access. When you stop reacting to their emotional cues, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. They can't twist your guilt if you refuse to carry it. They can't exploit your doubt if you trust your intuition. And they can't use fear against you when you're no longer afraid of walking away. That's how you disarm emotional manipulation, not by fighting it, but by no longer feeding it. The ability to recognize the intent behind a question is one of the most powerful psychological defenses you can develop. Most people listen to what is being asked, but not why it's being asked. Liars and manipulators rely on that blind spot. They count on you hearing words, not motives. When you focus only on the surface of a question, you respond automatically. You answer, explain, or clarify. But when you start examining intent, you interrupt the manipulator's rhythm. You shift from emotional to analytical thinking, from reacting to observing. That shift alone changes the entire balance of power. A manipulator's question often sounds harmless or even caring, but there's usually a hidden agenda beneath it. They might ask, "Are you sure that's what happened?" Or "Why are you being so sensitive?" At first, it sounds like curiosity, but the real purpose is to challenge your reality, make you doubt your perception, or pressure you into compliance. Every manipulative question carries energy. It either invites clarity or creates confusion. The moment you sense that confusion, you're seeing intent. That's the difference between being emotionally controlled and emotionally intelligent. Intent reveals itself in tone, timing, and consistency. For example, someone who asks questions to understand will wait for your answer, listen fully, and validate what you share. A manipulator, on the other hand, will interrupt, redirect, or twist your words to serve their version of events. They're not collecting truth, they're gathering ammunition. Their intent is to lead you somewhere away from accountability, away from your boundaries, or away from your certainty. The question might sound neutral, but the emotional undertone tells you everything. If you feel tense, cornered, or subtly accused, trust that feeling. Manipulative questions always carry a hidden emotional sting. Once you begin recognizing intent, you start realizing how often people use questions to manage emotions rather than find answers. "Don't you think you're overreacting?" is rarely about your behavior. It's about making you question your right to feel. "Why would I lie to you?" isn't an inquiry. It's an intimidation tactic meant to make you prove your trust. "And how can you say that after everything I've done for you?" isn't seeking understanding. It's manufacturing guilt. When you recognize these patterns, you see that manipulative questions aren't about communication at all. They are about control through emotional redirection. The key to disarming manipulation is learning to separate content from context. The content is what's being said, the literal words. The context is the energy behind them, what the person gains from asking. A genuine person asks questions to connect, to solve, to clarify. A manipulator asks to corner, to confuse, to dominate. They use language like a chessboard, positioning each question to move you emotionally until you surrender without realizing it. When you stop responding automatically and start observing purposefully, you see the moves before they happen. You realize that some questions don't deserve answers, they deserve analysis. Recognizing intent also protects your emotional bandwidth. When you stop personalizing manipulative questions, they lose power over you. You no longer feel obligated to justify or over-explain. You start responding with calm curiosity instead of defense. Simple phrases like "That's an interesting question, why do you ask?" or "What makes you say that?" can flip the dynamic instantly. Now, the manipulator has to reveal their motives, and that transparency exposes their game. They thrive in emotional chaos. They crumble under logical scrutiny. Every time you recognize intent, you reinforce self-trust. Because manipulation feeds on doubt and awareness kills doubt, when you can read between the lines and see the emotional motives behind someone's questions, you stop being reactive and start being intentional. That's when you become psychologically unshakable, not because you never face manipulation, but because you see it coming before it lands. Silence, boundaries, and composure are the ultimate weapons against manipulation because they expose what liars fear most: loss of control. Manipulators depend on emotional reactions to gauge their influence. They ask loaded questions, provoke doubt, and stir defensiveness, all to pull you into their emotional current. The moment you stay calm and quiet, that current breaks. They can't read you, they can't steer you, and that makes them uncomfortable, even powerless. Your composure becomes the mirror that reflects their tactics back at them, forcing them to confront their own lack of control. When someone asks a manipulative question like, "Why are you being so difficult?" or "Don't you trust me?" they're not searching for an answer, they're searching for an emotional response. If you react defensively, they win. They learn that your emotions are accessible, that your boundaries are flexible, and that your need to be understood can be exploited. But when you hold silence instead, You send a different message, one that says, "You don't get to define my truth." Silence disrupts the script. It takes away their ability to control the narrative because you're no longer playing your assigned role. Boundaries reinforce that silence. A manipulator thrives on blurred lines. They want to know how far they can push before you push back. Every time you let something slide, you give them more room to operate. But the moment you set a firm boundary calmly, without emotional charge, the game changes. They might escalate, guilt trip, or act offended to test that boundary, but your consistency becomes your armor. Boundaries aren't about confrontation, they're about clarity. When you clearly define what behavior you will and won't tolerate, you take away their playground. There's no room left for psychological guessing or emotional negotiation. Composure is what ties silence and boundaries together. It's the internal state that tells a liar, "You can't shake me." Manipulators rely on chaos. They study your breathing, your tone, your eye contact, all to see how deeply they can unsettle you. When you maintain calm energy, you're communicating that their tactics no longer work. You become emotionally neutral, and neutrality is something manipulators can't feed on. It starves their control because they can't find the reaction they were hoping for. They may try harder at first, raising their emotional intensity to provoke you, but the calmer you stay, the faster their power fades. The strength of composure isn't in pretending not to care, it's in caring strategically. You can acknowledge what's happening without absorbing it. When someone tries to bait you into an argument or guilt you with a question designed to twist your emotions, pause, breathe, notice what's being done instead of what's being said. You don't owe anyone an immediate answer. Sometimes silence itself is the answer. It communicates self-respect, awareness, and emotional control all at once. Liars can't manipulate what they can't access, and your calmness makes you inaccessible. When you combine silence, boundaries, and composure, you shift from being reactive to being observant. You start seeing patterns instead of taking words personally. You understand that manipulation is never about you. It's about the manipulator's need for dominance, validation, or control. Once you recognize that, you stop internalizing their tactics. Their emotional weapons fall flat because you're no longer emotionally available for manipulation. You become the grounded presence in the storm they create. This doesn't mean you ignore people or shut down emotionally. It means you lead every interaction from awareness rather than reaction. Silence gives you power, boundaries give you structure, composure gives you credibility. Together, they dismantle manipulation from the inside out, because when you remain calm in the face of someone trying to control you, you reveal their truth, not yours. You show the world who's really in control of the conversation. And that quiet strength, that unwavering self-command, is what no liar can fake and no manipulator can overpower.